LiSTNR production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. Hollywood's Night of Nights is still months away, but the Whisker campaign is already in full swing with some big names being thrown around. But how much of the hype is real and how much of it will pay off?
Hollywood positions itself as this very left-leaning place, and I'm not sure how well it will sit with Academy voters that Sydney Sweeney, is a registered Republican and has had all this controversy recently.
That deep dive into the backroom deals and studio politics behind the Oscars is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spyrou. It's Friday the 26th of September.
Hey Tara, and to you listening. Starting in the US, where authorities are now saying the fatal shooting of an ICE detainee office in Dallas was another ideologically motivated attack. Sniper 29-year-old Joshua Jahn killed one immigration detainee and wounded two others when he opened fire on the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office before taking his own life. According to FBI Director Kash Patel, while he struck detainees, his goal appeared to be to scare ICE agents after a note was found saying, quote, "Hopefully this will give ICE agents real terror to think, is there a sniper with AP rounds on that roof?" in an apparent reference to Charlie Kirk's shooter.
Yeah, and since the Trump administration has vowed to crack down on what they're labelling a rise in, quote, violent left-wing extremism, with Vice President J.D. Vance saying this about the Texas shooter earlier this week.
We know this person was politically motivated. They were politically motivated to go after law enforcement, and I think that is the most disgusting thing.
Now, police say there'd been a high degree of planning, with Jarl using apps to track ICE agents' movements, having searched for the Charlie Kirk shot video, as well as about ballistics, meaning guns and ammo. However, his parents have since come out disputing authorities' statements, saying he wasn't a radical leftist or anti-ICE, with one of his family members saying it has nothing to do with that to a reporter from the New York Post, but he didn't elaborate any further.
Yeah, and just briefly, Tara, while we are talking about the US, Trump administration and ICE, earlier in the week there was an ICE deportation raid video posted by the US government on its Homeland Security and White House social media accounts. I'm going to play a little bit of that for you now. So that's the Pokemon theme song there, and it's being used underneath actual footage of ICE and Border Patrol agents making various arrests, including one where they blow up someone's actual door. And at the end, it shows a bunch of fake Pokemon cards with offenders' photos and their crimes, including murder, burglary, and pedophilia. Well, today, Pokemon themselves have responded, saying they did not give permission for them to use any of their intellectual property for whatever the hell this video was.
Yeah, and it's not actually the first time. Previously, the White House or the Trump administration has used videos from other people, like podcaster Theo Von. They used a clip of his face for one of their other deportation videos, and he later asked them to remove it. And there was another one where they used that viral Jet to Holiday audio over the top of some footage.
Nothing beats a Jet to holiday.
So they're playing that over the top of videos of people being handcuffed and put in cars, and it drew a lot of backlash, and I don't know, all I can say is that we're living in a really weird time right now.
Back home now, and after a messy coalition breakup and reunion, dumping a front bencher, hitting record low poll numbers and trying to manage infighting over net zero, you'd think now would be the right time for someone or anyone to topple opposition leader Sussan Ley. But current frontrunner, Shadow Home Affairs Minister Andrew Hastie reckons that's not him.
Look, I support Sussan. Anyone who's speculating otherwise is being mischievous. My main concern is that the centre-right is fragmenting. We've seen the rise in the One Nation vote and other micro-parties, and having us fragmented on the right is very strategically advantageous for Labor.
That's Hastie speaking on 2GB Sydney there, and it comes after he's spent the week posting on social media about a number of things, rebuilding Australia's industrial base and car manufacturing, and cutting net overseas migration, which he says is causing the housing crisis and making Australians feel like, quote, strangers in their own home. He also hasn't shied away from framing the radical left as, again, quote, evil, and talk of putting Australians first.
I'm a team player. I'm just being a little bolder in some of the policy positions that I think we should adopt. There's work to be done. But these are pretty straightforward, principled positions, which I think a lot of people are looking for us to adopt.
And some of those talking points, Tara, they drew the support of Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, the senator who was dumped from the shadow front bench over her comments about Indian migrants and not backing Sussan Ley as leader. So a lot of insiders are saying this week that what Andrew Hastie is doing, what Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price is doing, is part of this broader strategy by some on the party's right, which is supported and mentored by ex-Prime Minister Tony Abbott, to present Andrew Hastie as a conservative alternative to Sussan Ley.
To New York now, where the high-profile guilty verdict of Sean Diddy Combs is resting in the hands of a federal judge who says he will decide very shortly whether or not to grant the US rapper's appeal. The Grammy-winning producer and music mogul returned to court today for the first time since he was found guilty on 2 prostitution-related charges back in July, with his legal team arguing that the conviction should be overturned because the federal law prohibiting transportation for the purpose of prostitution should only be applied to pimping, and he was only an alleged consumer.
Yes, and a reminder, the 55-year-old was found guilty of transporting Cassie Ventura, a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane, and multiple male escorts across state lines and internationally for prolonged, quote, freak-offs. Now, while he has spent more than 12 months behind bars, he's facing up to 20 years in prison if the July conviction stands, with the judge to decide on his appeal by the end of next week.
Half of the foreign students coming to Australia are aiming for permanent residency, according to a new report, with language barriers their main hurdle. According to a government migration study, roughly half of the students who travelled from overseas to Australia to attend university in the 2010s are now permanent residents.
However, over half only secured jobs well below their skill levels due to not being able to speak English well enough, leaving many earning less than Aussies on entry-level graduate jobs, according to The Australian. The study showed domestic graduates with a business and management degree specifically are pocketing $115,000 a year, while international graduates are earning around $57,000. So That's about half less there. The report says that trend of students wanting permanent residency is on the rise, and it also critiques universities and training providers for not preparing students for study and the workforce well enough and ensuring they've mastered English. Now, Jobs and Skills Australia is pushing for English proficiency to be a core part of study on assessments, which, to be honest, I'm surprised to hear that's not already the case.
Yeah, same. We do know that we have high levels of overseas student numbers in Australia. In fact, we rely on them quite heavily economically as well, Chris. And I was only just speaking to an immigration and migration expert for a deep dive last week who was saying that a lot of the people that are pushing at immigration rallies and things like that to completely shut our borders don't actually realise that and how much we actually rely on certain types of migration, particularly foreign students, and that we actually wouldn't function without them.
And it's not every day you get shouted a beer thanks to the leader of a country, but that's just what happened in New York by our very own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
It's been a really proud occasion as Australia's Prime Minister to be here to talk to the United Nations tonight. But it's also
Yes, an Aussie expat pub called the Old Mates Pub in downtown Manhattan, owned by our very own listener, former radio and current podcast host Andy Lee and Hamish Blake, as well as Hugh Jackman and Ash Barty. Well, it has a running trend that the pub will shout everyone in it a free beer anytime an Aussie icon visits and rings the bell.
it's an amazing bar. Australians know how to have fun.
There we go. So that was Albo, who was also with Foreign Minister Penny Wong, and they mentioned they were in the US for the UN General Assembly meeting, and they went along to the pub with Albo apparently introduced as a very special Australian who was visiting on a student visa.
Nice.
And he went on to pour some beers for patrons who, by the way, among them were some Aussie stars as well. There was fashion designer Pip Edwards and our beloved Olympic gold medalist Emma McKeon, and also Cody Simpson in the crowd.
Ah, there you go. Well, look, what a way to end a massive week of news. That is it for our headlines for today. Coming up next is my deep dive looking into the world of the Oscars. Why the hell we're talking about them so soon? Stick around, that deep dive is coming up for you next.
And the Oscar goes to.
And the Oscar goes to.
And the Oscar goes to.
It's more than 6 months away, but let me tell you, the Oscars race is well and truly underway. Names like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Cynthia Erivo, Sweeney and Adam Sandler are some of the big ones being thrown around at the moment, and it's not entirely because their films are being positively reviewed. So, how exactly does one create Oscar buzz? What strings are pulled and by who? And why the hell are we even talking about it when they're not until March next year? LiSTNR Entertainment's Amy Kimball is one of the greatest cinephiles I've ever met, and she joins me now. Amy, welcome to the briefing. I love a film and I love an award ceremony as much as the next guy, but why are we already hearing Oscar buzz?
Well, this is basically the start of an Oscar campaign. So we've just had the Venice Film Festival wrap up. Venice is considered one of the big five of the film festivals, both in Europe and globally. And lots of the films that go on to be nominated for and win Oscars will have premieres at the Venice Film Festival, which has happened with The Rock's latest film, The Smashing Machine.
Well, have you ever heard of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC?
That's the bloody thing they're trying to ban.
So what can you tell us about this Oscar campaign? So if it starts at these international film festivals, the actors go off and do their things, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is doing his thing at the moment with a lot of people on the internet kind of clocking it and going, is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson gunning for an Oscar?
Yeah, so you can kind of see all of the hallmarks of a classic Oscar campaign starting to ramp up here. So a film to be eligible for an Oscar, especially for Best Picture, needs to play in an LA cinema, like in a Los Angeles County cinema, for a minimum of 7 consecutive days to be eligible for the awards. But a way that you can then build buzz early is to have them play overseas at these festivals, get awards. Venice is very notorious for having really long standing ovations for their films, which has happened with The Smashing Machine. There was, I think, about a 12 to 15 minute standing ovation.
Yeah, and I heard he cried.
Dwayne Johnson was crying, exactly. But then studios will sort of try and release their films later in the year. So you'll often see films getting a Christmas release, a December release, an autumn release, basically to try and keep the films in the minds of the Academy voters. Whereas you might see films like Sinners, where people are gunning for Michael B. Jordan to get nominated. He might not get that nomination because that film came out in around April of this year, and that's a long time until voting will happen early next year. Yeah,
so which is probably a timely time for me to ask you, what is the voting nomination process like? Who's involved? Who does what? Please explain it for us. As Pauline Hanson will say, please explain.
You've probably heard lots of people talk about the Academy. They thank the Academy.
Yes.
People talk about the Academy snubbed this person. The Academy, in terms of the voting body, is roughly 10,000 members, and about 12 to 13% of that is the acting body. So the Academy is split up into those bodies of, directors, cinematographers, costume designers, and at the nomination stage, you can only vote for the body that you belong to. So at the nomination stage, you are campaigning to other actors and you are trying to get them to vote. And that's the biggest body in the Academy.
So what are some of the strategies that actors or high-profile people have used in the past? I mean, one that springs to mind for me is Lady Gaga around the A Star Is Born.
There can be 100 people in the room and 99 don't believe in you. But I had this one with me.
So you can see there is so much now that goes into a campaign in terms of getting your visibility up. There's all of this stuff in Variety of the actors on actors and doing all these different interviews, doing red carpets. We've seen stuff with the Barbie cast or with Timothée Chalamet in terms of having really standout red carpet appearances. That is keeping you in the conversation and keeping your movie in the conversation. And then on a sort of larger studio PR marketing level, it's screenings that people get invited to. It's email blasts. There is an Academy email list and you have to pay to be able to send out emails to that list to invite them to screenings, invite them to events. People will send out PR packages. There is quite a stringent list of rules that the Academy sets out. There is a whole document about what you can and can't do in terms of when you're campaigning to people. So unlike a political campaign, you can't say, vote for me. You have to use different wording. And so this term for your consideration evolved through the 20th century. And basically they will target certain areas, so areas in LA where they know that voters live, and they will target them, with billboards, with mobile ads, with print ads. It's, estimated to be tens of millions of dollars that that studios are paying, especially big ones like, Warner Brothers, Universal, even now streamers are spending a lot of money like Netflix. And so it really is a lot more of a sort of political and economic game than some people might realise.
Is this where manufactured rivalries, I'm thinking about Barbenheimer, come into play?
Something like Barbenheimer, it was an interesting sort of mutually beneficial narrative for both of those movies where they were sort of pitted against each other. But then there are always elements of, I suppose, legitimacy to the Oscars, quote unquote, that, a film by Christopher Nolan is seen as more worthy of an Oscar than a big blockbuster like Barbie.
Which actually brings us perfectly to my next question, which was, what is it that a film has to do to make it Oscar worthy? Is this something where it has to be serious, it has to be emotional, the main actor has to go through some physical transformation? What are the hallmarks of an Oscar-worthy film, Amy Kimball?
Yes, there are, Oscar buzz or Oscar bait are terms that get thrown around a lot, but it also depends on which category you're involved in. So, there are films that can get nominated and win for things like makeup and hairstyling. We've seen like Suicide Squad or even Norbit win in those categories, and they aren't, considered to be these prestigious, highbrow, lofty films, but those categories are seen as kind of different, and it's a technical achievement rather than more of an artistic achievement. But yes, as you mentioned, in terms of the idea of like transformation, especially in acting, is something that comes up time and time again, and that is something that we're already starting to see with articles about Dwayne Johnson and about the Smashing Machine. We're seeing headlines about how it's transformative and about how he's unrecognisable, and we're talking about how many prosthetics he's wearing and how long it takes for him to put on all these prosthetics for the film. And, it's definitely been advantageous in the past. We've seen the same makeup artist who has worked on this film, The Smashing Machine, did the award-winning makeup for The Darkest Hour, which won Gary Oldman an Oscar for Best Actor for playing Winston Churchill. In the past, Transformative has also been playing actors with disabilities, which is seen obviously less favourable now, but in the past, it did win quite a lot of able-bodied actors Oscars.
For anyone at this point who's unaware of The Smashing Machine, it's a new film featuring Dwayne Johnson, and it's an American biographical sports drama about an MMA fighter. We've also seen Sydney Sweeney come into this conversation a little bit for a film that she's in, and it's also in the fighting world, isn't it?
Yes, so she's playing a real-life boxer. The film's called Christie. There was some sort of buzz early on in terms of when pictures were released, and again, we were able to see this transformation. Sydney Sweeney had, gained a lot of muscle for this role to be able to look and fight like a boxer in the film. But I think there are some sort of interesting differences between these two in terms of it hasn't received any awards. The Smashing Machine received the Silver Lion at the Venice Film Festival. The director, Benny Safdie, received that award. We haven't really seen any awards. And then I think the narrative is quite different where, Hollywood positions itself as this very left-leaning place. And, at the Oscars this year, we saw them really position themselves in opposition to Trump. And I'm not sure how well it will sit with Academy voters that Sydney Sweeney, is a registered Republican and has had all this controversy recently. Whereas I feel like Dwayne Johnson is really campaigning very hard to show us this image of himself now as a vulnerable man, and that he's moving away from these really big budget films and moving into indie films. He's really sort of drawing a line in the sand in a way and saying, okay, I'm moving into a different part of my career and I'm changing my image and I'm going to move into more quote-unquote serious films.
Okay, so he might be in with a shot. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson might be in with a shot. Who else is gunning for an Oscar at the moment that we should be keeping an eye on? Is there anyone here, are there any potentially history-making wins on the cards that we should be keeping our eye on ahead of March next year? A reminder, this is in March next year.
It's a long campaign from now until March. But interestingly, the Safdie brothers, who have previously worked together, they are now releasing films each solo at the same time in the same year. So we've got The Smashing Machine, but Benny Safdie's brother, Josh Safdie, is releasing a movie called Marty Supreme, which stars Timothée Chalamet. Obviously, Timothée Chalamet has got quite a few nominations in the last few years for his films, and he seems to really be gunning for awards.
This was 5.5 years of my life. I poured everything I had into playing this incomparable artist, Mr. Bob Dylan. But the truth is, I'm really in pursuit of greatness.
We've got a new Paul Thomas Anderson movie coming out very soon, Leonardo DiCaprio starring in that. Obviously, he already has an Oscar, which can sometimes impact your chances. People don't like to vote for you if you've already won sometimes. But he has definitely been touted to be in the running for another nomination. Jeremy Allen White.
Yes, of course, from Shameless and The Bear.
Yes, from The Bear. So obviously he's already had some awards attention for his work in TV, but now he is going to be playing Bruce Springsteen in a biopic about the singer. So obviously that can be a recipe for success for nominations, if not wins. Also some buzz around Jesse Plemons in Begonia. Yorgos Lanthimos tends to get quite a few acting nominations for his films. We've seen wins with Emma Stone and Olivia Colman in the past. We've got some performances coming up from Paul Mescal, but one of the big ones is Daniel Day-Lewis is returning to acting after saying he was retired. He did Phantom Thread and said that was going to be his last film, but his son has written and directed a film, and Daniel Day-Lewis is starring in that film called Anemone. If he's nominated and he wins, he would maintain the record for most individual wins for Best Leading Actor at the Oscar.
Excellent stuff. Amy Kimball, thank you so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thank you for having me.
That was Listener Entertainment's Amy Kimball speaking with me there. And that is it for this episode of The Briefing. Don't forget, Helen Smith will be back in your feeds this afternoon for the afternoon edition of The Briefing. And Antoinette Lattouf will be in your feeds tomorrow for the weekend briefing. I'm Chris Spyrou. Catch you next time.